As usual, Skylar and Lean Frontiers, thank you for all the background work and putting this together. I'd like to introduce Dr. Lou Flaspholer. He's from a doctor in Cincinnati. I've known him for about 4 or 5 years now, and discussions with him always leave me with more in my head than when the discussion started, and I suspect this will be another of those. So, Lou, I won't go any deeper in the introduction. Let's get straight into it. You said to me about 4 or 5 years ago that well-being is the result of. I'd like you to finish that sentence, please, and then tell us how this came into your mind. Let's start there.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Oscar. Thanks for inviting me here. So the hypothesis that I've been working under for the past decade or so is that the strongest predictors of well-being are meaningful purpose. So the individual's why. Do I have a reason to get out of bed in the morning? And positive relationships. Do I have people that I care about and love me, and a social support network? And those two things tend to go hand in hand. So I think you asked, how did that come about?
Yeah, how did that develop in your mind? And by the way, everyone who's joined live, if you want to submit a question, I've got a couple here from your enrollments or registrations. But if you want to submit a question, then please post it, and I'll seek to ask it of Lou. Yeah. So the second part of the question was, how did this come about in your mind? I remember how it came up in a discussion you and I were having when I was working with an oyster farming organization, but I wondered how that developed, even prior to that, how it developed in your mind. Why did it become obvious to you that this was important? Or how did it?
The cracks in the foundation go way back, and there's a group of psychologists that across the world independently started looking at psychology. And what they started seeing was that they were treating things like depression. And the work in psychology was taking a person from depressed to not depressed. And again, interests that's eventually merged into something called positive psychology, not from depressed to not depressed. And they stage, but so with that, 4 years of medical, we call it healthcare system, primary care, training as a room, immune diseases, all of that. But as the cracks in the foundation started to get worse, the hypothesis came to me that I'm not trained in healthcare at all. I'm trained in disease care, right? I mean, perhaps 1% of what I was trained in was how to keep people healthy and thriving, as opposed to how do we keep people out of the system. Once people hit a disease state, we treat them, and we, in the US especially, keep them in a disease state as opposed to reversing it, if that makes sense. So the foundation started cracking. I started working with a group of family medicine docs, and at one point around 2012 or so, there were 7 other doctors, all of whom had at least 4 years of medical school, at least 3 years of training in primary care. And the question arose, what are the strongest predictors of well-being? And Oscar, I don't know if you've ever been in a classroom where nobody did the homework, right?
2 days ago.
The teacher asks a question that nobody knows the answer to because nobody's done the homework, right? And so as that question came up, it looked like we're all squirming, trying to not be the one focused on because nobody knew. Yeah. And all of us have gone through all this training. So that group grew to a much larger group made up of people from all over the whole fabric of society. And ultimately, we got to the hypothesis that meaningful purpose and positive relationships are the strongest predictor of well-being.
Okay, that's the background of that. And it came up with the oyster farming story because of the question you just asked me about background to to what extent had people done the homework, and how did the introduction go in what I was doing. And we started to talk about people leaning back or leaning in, and that's how that's how it arose. That paraphrase arose, 4 or 5 years ago. So tell us, you've spoken about how it emerged and how it sort of impacted your work. And it always amuses me about your analysis of healthcare, and that you're actually in disease care. But tell us how in your experience this applies to the workplace. How you can see a transition, or your transition of this hypothesis into the workplace.
So as I think about it, a couple things come to mind there. One is the story of Jancoa, this janitorial company. So my hypothesis in the workplace is that in the best of the best organizations, they know their why. The organization knows their why. And in the best of the best, it almost always comes down to the same thing. Toyota's is we're here to contribute to the lives of our employees and their families. We're here to contribute to the community. And I think it's through making cars that Toyota contributes to the community. And we're here to contribute to the economy. Story Constructions is we want everyone to have a good day every day. Right? And all of that, I think, is about nurturing the individual. So they know their why. And the best of the best, I think, are looking for the individual why and working to nurture the individual why through the work of the organization. So there's a company here in Cincinnati called Jancoa. Jancoa was started in the end of the 1980s. There's a guy, Tony Miller, the oldest of five, at 19 years old, 1989, he's starting college. His dad was going in for what was supposed to be a minor procedure and says to Tony, look, Tony, if something happens to me, promise me you'll take care of your dying on the table. Tony drops out of college, starts a janitorial companies here. 10 years later, he's done incredibly well. He's got 100 employees in this janitorial company, but has a 400% turnover rate, right? So in order to keep 100 employees, he's got to hire 400 people. It's just a revolving door. And on any given day, there's a 30% no-show rate. And this is industry average. And actually, there's a book about this called The Dream Manager. It's written as if it's fiction, so the names I'm using are not the actual names. But they describe this all. So Tony's got 100 employees, 400% turnover rate, 30% no-show rate. They're making $2 million a year with this, and they're just beating their head on the wall. He and his wife, Mary, are trying to figure out, why can't we do any better? And because people don't have a why. Joe can't talk the individual's why, if that makes sense. And so as they start, people start leaning in. Common themes they saw were that people wanted to get a high school degree. Some people wanted to learn English. Others wanted the ability to buy a house. Now, the janitorial company, Jancoa, wasn't financially supporting this, but what they were doing was creating this incredible community where, let's say I'm working to get my high school degree and I'm struggling with math. And the dream manager, Joe Candela, knows I'm struggling with math, and he knows you, Oscar, are good with math, and you've helped other people, right? So he asks you, Oscar, would you be willing to help Lou? And you say, sure. So you're helping me up. Somebody else is helping you on your journey to where you want to go. And it just blew away anything seen in the janitorial world. The book was written in the early 2000s. They dropped to an unheard of 12% turnover rate. While the economy's still going strong, they got people pounding on the door. And they're not advertising for employees anymore. They go from 100 employees at 2 million in revenues to 300 employees. So if you triple that 2 million, you should be at 6 million. They're 12 million. People are just leaning in. and they're not even working with the process tools. Now, what was interesting on the journey, so, one of the things that came to mind as I was thinking about this today is this idea of help them grow or watch them go, right?
Say that again. Help them grow or watch them go.
Correct.
Right.
Right. So Jancoa is helping them grow, right? And just an amazing community. And individuals were finding their why. Take that example where you're helping me with math. That's a relationship that's being built there. So these positive relationships are being strengthened. And what was interesting, the further they got into it, was that after about 3 years, people started to leave. And Mary Miller, Tony's wife, the founders, Mary said, I talked to her once, and she said how when that first started happening, she really felt hurt. They had put all this work in there, and it really kind of deflated her. And she said that was part of my learning curve. People were outgrowing what Jancoa could nurture. So let's say, for the sake of discussion, I get my high school degree and I'm interested in healthcare. They can't nurture me in healthcare anymore, right? I need to go somewhere else. And what she said, I finally realized, is that these people graduated and I need to celebrate their graduation. I needed to be celebrating the graduation. So help them grow and then sometimes watch them go. But they're graduating, they're moving on, and this was opening other doors for somebody new to come in to grow and to nurture.
It does.
If that makes sense.
I love that story. I've heard it before, but it gives me goosebumps whenever I hear that story, and it's done it again. Dave Himes submitted a question, and his question is, and thanks for attending live, Dave. What advice would you give to anyone hoping to create a thriving environment in their corner of the world? And probably more importantly, how can they get started?
So I think as you and I have been talking about this over the years, and others in that group that we meet every Friday, I think a critical piece, as we've talked about, is knowing the why of your organization, and then being very intentional about looking for the why of each individual. Where are they leaning in? Where do they want to go? Not where do I want them to go, but where do they want to go, and nurturing them through our why, the why of the organization, if that makes sense.
It does. Perhaps to illustrate that, when we were talking about this last week, the analogy popped into my head of the jigsaw puzzle. When you start the jigsaw puzzle, you do the straight edges, which is the outside. And to me, that's that's the organizational why, the surrounds, the straight edges, the single row of pieces, if you like, that complete the four sides on a square jigsaw puzzle. And then the individual whys are the remaining pieces that have got to slot in to the hole in the middle, if you like. And if they fit easily, then the individual why is aligned with the organizational why. If they've got to be juggled and they can't be squeezed in, or it's awkward to get them in, and you get them, then there's a disconnect there. And I think I see that in organizations. You can see where individual whys fit with the organizational why, and you can see where they don't. And I think that analogy helps. I don't know if you want to comment a little further on that and what you might have seen in the past.
I agree with everything you just said. What comes to mind is a mantra that when you're called to stand your ground, it helps to know the ground upon which you stand. So the more an organization understands who they are, both their why and their what, then I think it's much easier to see, is this a good fit? And when that individual at Jancoa outgrew what Jancoa could nurture, it's not necessarily, it can be a graduation. and not a loss, but a gain that this
Yeah,
person is moving on and doing better things.
absolutely. And I think this opens the door, in terms of this, the people we're going to have listening, they're going to be somewhat TWI driven. And clearly I have a bias in this, an open bias, and an openly declared bias. But I relate this back to the job relations foundations. And I think if you consider those, foundations and practice those reliably and consistently and daily and not just once a week at a review, whatever it may be, then I think that opens the door for what you're talking about, with that, particularly the alignment of the why, the meaningful purpose part. Well, both of them really, isn't it? If you may want to comment on that. Yeah, I know you're passionate about job relations and you've practiced it through Dave and studied it. Um, and I know from my relationship with you that you're pretty good at the foundations. So you might want to comment on how you think they fit with what we've been talking about.
Well, I have to admit, I don't have my JR card sitting in front of me here, but I
I'll
think
grab
they're
mine. Hang
all,
on a minute. It's right here.
so read the very first one is let each
Let each
person.
worker know how they're doing, and a key, I think, phrase, figure out what you expect of the person. So I reckon that's the jigsaw puzzle bit. Does my bit fit in with the big bit?
I
And the
mean, right
role of the
there.
manager is to help to make that happen.
So you think about that. If I've, where what comes to mind there was a woman with one of in my old office who was just incredible with putting people at ease. And that's somebody I want her working with patients. I want her checking the people in because she puts them at ease. You put her in a place where she's working in a corner, she's not lighting up. You put her on
Yeah.
a
So
computer.
what I've heard you say there is, it's figuring out, it's make best use of her ability. What's her jigsaw piece? What's her puzzle piece look like, if you like, and where does it best fit in this surround, if you like? It's sort of, it's taking that analogy a little bit further. Where we've got to make that piece has to fit somewhere, and we've got to get it into the right place. Otherwise it's going to be awkward. It's going to be uncomfortable. Things aren't going to work.
And I think, and I'd be interested in your take on this, Oscar, but I think there's an intentionality about that unless you're saying, look, we are looking for the gifts, the talents, we're looking for where we see them light up, where we see them lean in. Unless
Yes.
you're doing that, you're just throwing jigsaw puzzles in or jigsaw pieces anywhere and jamming on them and trying to, you know, make them work.
Yeah, make them fit. No, no, exactly. I think that, and that's why that figure out what you expect of the person. I think that can be adapted to, um, you know, there's no point in expectations being over here on the puzzle, if you like, if the piece belongs down here, because forcing it to your point up here ain't going to work. So that's where there's a very strong management function there of where and that ties in with the last foundation, make best use of each person's ability, and where does that what are these person's abilities, and we've got to get that piece to fit in that spot, if you like.
I agree. 100%. I think when you can figure out where the individuals light up, I'm not very good with memorizing drugs. My two old partners were phenomenal with knowing side effects of drugs and knowing where my strengths are and where my weaknesses are. We can put the jigsaw puzzles in the right pieces in the right place.
Yes.
We all used to sit in a common workroom. So in between patients, I could say, look, here's something I could tap into their strengths. They could tap into my strengths.
Yeah.
So configuring the workplace to both understanding the gifts, talents of the individuals, and then configuring the workplace so that you're nurturing all of that and accelerating things.
Exactly. So I think if the first, we've discussed or focused we've come to focus on meaningful purpose part of that phrase of yours. What about the positive relations bit? Because it's well-being, workplace. We've come to in our discussions is that workplace well-being, not just well-being, but workplace well-being is a consequence of meaningful purpose and positive relationships. I think we've discussed the meaningful purpose side. What about the positive relationships bit? Because once we've got the puzzle in the right place, if we've got a shitty environment, to be blunt, we're not going to have workplace well-being. So it's two things.
Yeah, so stepping back from all this, human beings are the most social animal on the face of the earth. And we do not do well in isolation. We do not do nearly as well in a non-trusting environment as we do in a trusting environment. My hypothesis here is that when we're looking at the individual's why and we're working to nurture that individual's why, the positive relationships go hand in hand with that. So I've told you the story before of a place that was every day a thank God it's Monday workplace, which happened when I was 18 years old, and I was working on restocking parts for a manufacturer that was moving from one part of the city to the other. It was 100 degrees in this factory. This buddy of mine and I met a guy, and it was a summer job. I met this guy, Bob, and we would bet our boss every day a 6-pack of beer. And for those who are thinking you can't drink when you're 18, at that point you could, right? So we would bet our boss each day a 6-pack of beer that we could do more work than we did the day before. And if I think about that logically, it's just idiotic, right? So for the price of a 6-pack, sometimes we're paying the boss a 6-pack because we didn't do more work today than we did yesterday. But man, was that fun. Bob and I would sharpen each other. So we didn't know each other before we started working together. But both of us lit up by problem solving, if that makes
Yeah,
sense,
right.
right?
Problem solving together.
Together.
Problem
Exactly.
solving as a team.
Exactly. Yeah. And so now we just, built this incredible bond where without knowing any of the quality improvement tools, we were doing the same thing. What are we going to try now that
Yeah.
we think will move us ahead? What did we learn? Did we move ahead or not? And at the end of the day, we busted our butts, and there was nothing more satisfying than sitting down with two other people that cared about you and that we were
That
sharing a beer in them.
collective problem solving with a common goal. Sounds a bit familiar. We've got 4 minutes left. So what I would like, one of the things we aim to do in this is, for those attending and those who listen to the recording, what advice would you give people? What's a takeaway you can give them, or something they can start thinking about that is underpinned by the theme work that will help them think further or delve into workplace well-being as a result of meaningful purpose and positive relationships?
I guess I would just reflect on what we've said. At first, the organization really has to be solid with their why. Why are we here? And then the intentionality of starting to look for the individual's why. And perhaps as a team, if you've got a management team, you start discussing that and then start tinkering with it together. When I think about the work, I love our Friday afternoon discussions, right? I think that's what we're doing, right? And oftentimes, when William is on with us, and you remember Mr. Manager from his organization seemed to be it wasn't a good fit. And how did you help him unpack that, Oscar? You just asked William, you suggested to William that he asked Mr. Manager in the last week, how many good days have you had? And when William ran the experiment, the answer was 0. Then William went to the last month, 0 again. The last year, 0. And by building that relationship, ultimately, Mr. Manager was able to see it wasn't a good fit. And that was somebody that we see that same issue not infrequently, right? When you move somebody from an operator to a leadership position, and it from the person who got moved up, that's a promotion. To step out and say this isn't a good fit is not an easy thing to do. But in an environment that's trying to get the right person in the right place, it becomes much easier when you're saying, look, if this isn't a good fit, we want to get you into the right place.
So the tips are, if you like, and I'm conscious of time, is consider as a group, consider the organizational why, perhaps the departmental why that you're a member of, and then the individual whys and seeking alignment, if you like, hunting for alignment, looking for alignment. Very good. So we're at the bottom of the hour, very close to it. So Dr. Lou is attending the TWI summit and running a discussion group, as I understand it. So those of you who've attended or listened to the recording and you want to delve more into Lou's knowledge and skills in this area, it goes way beyond being a medical practitioner, let me assure you. So for those of you who want to do it directly and would love to spend more time with Lou, he loves having a chat, as you've probably gathered, about this sort of stuff, and he's got a lot of background and advice. So please attend the summit and/or CardiCon early in April, registration through Lean Frontiers. Thank you, everyone, and thanks, Jim and Skylar, for organising this.
Thank you, Lou and Oscar, and thank you to everybody who did attend today. Just a quick reminder, there will be a link within 24 to 48 hours to the recording. Thank you again, Dr. Lou. See you later, Oscar.
We'll see you.
Thank you.
so much.